I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Friday edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane. We call this the Healing Circle. And this is co-sponsored by my colleagues over at the African American Child Wellness Institute. And for the past 2 weeks, we've been talking about concerns being raised in Minnesota about how Judge Peter Cahill has characterized the experience of Black children, young Black women in particular, who the community is saying experienced trauma, and who it seems like the judge is saying their trauma experience was not documented or represented adequately by the prosecution in the case. And Attorney General Keith Ellison has asked the judge and the court to recharacterize that experience. We're pleased to have Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison here today to talk about that. And Keith, the healing circle that we do tries to address the question of mental health in our community for families, for children. And we're glad that you're here and you've raised a point that we want to be conversant in. Keith, good to see you. And thank you. So I'm going to drop it on you. Talk about the background and the issue that we should all be knowledgeable of and raise our voices about.
Well, let me just start by saying, Derek Chauvin was convicted on all counts, including murder in the second degree for the murder of George Floyd. After that occurred, there's a sentencing hearing that has to happen. At that sentencing hearing, we asked the court to find that there were four separate bases to do what's known as an upward departure. So everybody should know that in Minnesota law and across the country, including the federal government, if you're convicted of a felony, you go to what's called the sentencing guidelines. Mm-hmm. Why were sentencing guidelines ever established? Because you'd see wildly divergent sentences for what is essentially the similar conduct. Sentencing guidelines theoretically are to minimize racial bias in sentencing. Mm-hmm. But of course, where there's a will, there's a way, and you can still weave bias right up into the sentencing guidelines if you want to. Anyway, the Supreme Court found that unless the defendant waives it, the sentence of a person, the judge cannot just enhance the sentence on their own. Either the jury or the judge, if the defendant waives, can find what are known as aggravating factors, which can justify as a factual basis an enhanced sentence. So in this case, Derek Chauvin said he'll let the judge see if there are aggravating factors, and the judge did find that there were 4 aggravating factors. One aggravating factor that would justify a sentence above the normal guideline sentence would be that Derek Chauvin was in a position of authority and abused it. 2, that he was particularly cruel to George Floyd. 3, that there were children who watched the abuse. And then 4, that the crime was committed in a group. Now, when the court finally got around to sentencing day, he found 2 sentencing enhancements that would justify a sentence above the sentencing guidelines. And those were particular cruelty and abuse of authority. And you only need to find one to justify an upward departure. Mm-hmm. And then the judge did give 10 years beyond the sentencing guideline sentence, 22 and a half years, the normal sentence being 12 and a half years for the guidelines. Now you start talking all this legal stuff and sometimes you lose folks, but I think it's important to try to go over it. So, because, for some people, a million years wouldn't be enough. Right. When I talked to the family, they said, don't y'all have the death penalty in Minnesota? We got it in Texas. This is what, and I said, no, we don't have it in Minnesota. I didn't tell them that I wouldn't support the death penalty for anyone under any circumstances, right? Because I didn't need to, because Minnesota won't allow it under any circumstances. But I did tell them we believe that sentencing should not be revenge, and it shouldn't be a message. It should be justified based on the facts of the case. We believed, and we did argue to the court, that the presence of the children was a very important and legitimate enhancement factor. That's in our court documents. And the court originally found that we were right. But when he did his sentencing, he neglected that factor. And, look, I'm not questioning that even though the sentence could have been longer, we asked for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
The sentencing could have been longer. We'd have been happier if it were longer. We didn't challenge the sentence, but we did point out to the court that for the court to use language within the court's order, identifying that the children were laughing, giggling between each other during this horrific murder was an inappropriate way to characterize what happened. I personally think that most people who watch the video would not walk away thinking, oh, these kids were laughing and therefore maybe entertained by the murder of George Floyd. I think most people watch the video would be utterly horrified, as the young people were, and traumatized. And the children cried on the witness stand. Now, I would say that normally, as I said before, if Derek Chauvin did not waive his right to argue sentencing enhancement factors and thereby allow the judge to do it, we clearly would have put in evidence of that these children were traumatized. In fact, we were trying to get Judge Vinson, who gave us a declaration in support of our motion to revise the sentencing memorandum, and she said very clearly these kids were traumatized. And then, but the judge, after we raise these issues, as is our right to do, and I think our responsibility, the court gave a very stern rejection of our request. But look, that's the court's prerogative. On record is our objection to his characterization that the kids were not, there's no indicia of trauma. There's clear indicia of trauma in the record. And I don't know what kids crying on the witness stand saying they can't go back to that place anymore. I'm like, what? And then, many people on our team felt like, they recognized and believed that if you look at how Black children, particularly girls, are treated in the criminal justice system as witnesses or even victims, oftentimes the system and people who administer it will treat them as if they were 5-10 years older than they actually were. And this is known as adultification, right? And this is something that, is academically recognized. It's not something we're making up. It is well founded in American psychology, and is not at all something that's far afield. And so we just try. Look, and so the court did what the court did, but our documents are filed, right? And look, I was not even, quite honestly, the court at the sentencing, which was on a Friday, gave out a memorandum at the end of the sentencing. I took that document, didn't even have a chance to read it, stuck it in my back pocket, read it when I got home, didn't like what I saw. But there were people in the popular press critiquing the memo before we ever did. Then we had a team meeting and said, we cannot let these children think that we stood by and did not stand up for them.
Right.
We asked them to testify. That was re-traumatizing. We didn't want to re-traumatize them, but we had to ask them to testify in order to put the evidence in. So we thought the least we could do is speak up for them. So the court apparently took it personally, not seriously. And that's the court's prerogative, and I'll leave it right there.
Well, thank you for taking the action that you have taken. And what I'm taking away from your comments just now, Attorney General Keith Ellison, is something about the importance of documenting our story, of creating our story and assuming that if we don't enter the data, it won't be entered, and that our failure to address everything, no matter what it is a failure to ourselves and a failure to society in general, because what we have to say and how we see things matters. It makes a difference. And quietness or silence on an issue, in this case, equals consent. And here we do not consent. We not agree with that, with the position of the judge in court.
Absolutely. And let me just say, it's not the job of the state or even the defense to agree with the court. That's not why we're there. There are powerful incentives, none of them legitimate, to just sort of like suck it up and take it. Because you always, as a litigant, state or the defense, if you disagree with the court, there are some judges who have what you call black robe disease. Now, I'm not saying this judge has that, but what is black robe disease? Black robe is, I used to be an ordinary lawyer, and if I told a joke that was funny, people laugh, and if I told a joke that was not funny, nobody laughed. And if people treated me like a normal person, suddenly I get the robe on, and I'm just way funnier, better looking. People be quiet when I talk. I start to think that my ideas are just so great, even though before they were kind of mediocre. And judges get it. Other people, I mean, anybody, anybody if you were in a position where people stood up when you walked in the courtroom, you're the only one wearing a black robe. You say be quiet. Everybody has to be quiet, and if they don't, they got to worry if the court's going to take it out on you in the next ruling. You know what I mean? And thereby take it out on your client. You kind of really don't want to piss off the judge unnecessarily. But we could not. So every time we question the judge, we kind of think about that. We don't just gratuitously take issue with what the court says. We thought long and hard and said, what if 6 months from now, 3 months from now, a year from now, some other litigant says, oh, well, it's okay to minimize the pain and trauma of these kids because don't you know, in the judge's order in this case, that's what the court did, and that was just fine. And I think that so we're like, no, we can't allow this. So we did what we did. I make no apologies. I'll do it. I would do it again. I will do it again. And my thing is, if I think the court's wrong, I'm gonna file an appeal, a motion for reconsideration, whatever it is.
Keith Ellison, I know you got to leave in a few minutes, but before you leave, I wanted to have our partners and colleagues, leaders in the area of child health and family health, mental health, weigh in on the concerns. We've talked about this for the past 2 weeks, monitoring and reflecting on the position you've taken. And I wanted to, in the style of this program, pass the talking stick to Dr. Breveda Garrett Akinsanya, who has called this to our attention. But Dr. B, what is the significance of acknowledging or refusing to acknowledge the trauma these children have experienced, and not only for them, but for the culture, not only for our culture, Black women, Black children, but for the culture at large? I think there's a big issue here about what authenticity and credibility and what humanity are, and whether we are entitled to or possess those characteristics.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Al. It's so good to be here, and thank you, Brother Keith, for showing up and showing out as you always do, bringing your best to the state and to the community, and especially to justice. What I'd like to say is that when we think about children who are the most vulnerable people on this planet, we have to think of ourselves as stewards, not just of their body, but of their spirits. So when we engage with little children, our teenagers, our undeveloped brains, because we know they don't develop fully till you get 26. When we deal with that, we have to be careful, because what is happening in the world and what happened with Judge Cahill was he marginalized, minimized the value of their pain. And that devaluation of one's pain is linked to centuries of devaluation of our humanity. And so what we see with this situation, and why it's so important, and why the infraction is so egregious, is he's saying to us, a child of color or a girl can stand there and watch someone be murdered and their mental health won't be compromised as if it's an animal watching a murder? That it doesn't matter. They're not connected. They don't know the man. That's what I believe I read. They don't know him. That right there tells you there's a lack of cultural understanding, because we know that we're collectivist people. And when we see another Black person, something happening to them, just like Darnella said on the stand, that could have been my brother. That could have been my father. That could have been my uncle. That could have been my husband. So when we look, we see kin, we see connection. And our white culture sees individualism. They don't know you. Why do you care? That's what we're dealing with. And so if we think about that and we take it beyond Minnesota to our country, to our to other countries, to the world, our lack of connection is what kills our spirit. You know the icon saying, I am because we are. And we only exist within the construct of our village, our community. And our strength is, and our destiny is so intertwined with that of our babies. That's where the pain is. That their hurt, their pain didn't count.
Attorney General, what can people do? Before the show began, you talked about too often our community is rather silent on issues and other communities speak up, show up. How do we try to change that dynamic, create a new narrative where we see ourselves as both able and obligated to raise our voices and to express our opinions? We value our and trust what we see and what we feel, and are comfortable sharing that, risking that we may be wrong. We're human beings. We could be wrong, but at least we got it off our chest, right? Sure. How do we motivate that kind of public engagement? And is this the right kind of issue to get ordinary moms and dads and people in the neighborhood engaged by either calling or letter writing or thinking or having backyard discussions? What do you think?
Courts are public. Trials are public. There is a very high burden to exclude anyone from a public trial. The courts have a right to be there. That's why you're seeing more and more videotaping of trials. And it's extremely hard to say, well, the court can't come in to seal a court record. It's very difficult to do it. And so the African-American community is part of the public. I think we should think about, is it possible to set up a court watch program to make sure that people are treated with justice and according to not only law, but also humanity and decency. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, I just think people should, they can write letters, they can offer their views, they could do podcasts on it. I think it's really important. But let me just say this. I mean, to walk past what the world saw happening to George Floyd is a moral challenge. I mean, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If the kids could have just walked away, I'm curious to know who would have just walked away. Who would say, "Not my business"? Who would say that? What kind of whatever color they were? Well, I don't care what racial background they were. You see that happening to another person. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it means to say, oh, they could have just walked away. Their moral compass didn't let them walk away.
That's right.
And that's the kind of young person I'm glad that we have. I mean, I'm gonna tell you, these were kids in every way that they're kids. I mean, when all the latest fashions the kids have, hair different colors, them eyelashes that are like 2 inches long, the kids wearing them these days. I mean, they were doing the kid thing, the kids do, but their moral compass said, I can't leave here. Now, did one or two of them laugh or at some point? Maybe, because human beings have a wide range of stress reactions. They also screamed, they also cried, they also pleaded. How is it that you didn't look at the crying and the pleading and the yelling, check his pulse, check his pulse? How did you not see that? But what you pluck out is what everybody else missed, which is inadvertent, involuntary, nervous laughter. That's what you saw, and you wrote extensively in the footnotes that. It's really curious that we got people on the bench who would look at a horrific scene and the reaction to it, and all they see is kids laughing, as if you only read that. If you didn't see the trial and you only read that, you would literally think these children were entertained by George Floyd's torture and murder. And I just couldn't sit around and say, yeah, that's fine. No, I mean, I'm sorry. And again, every lawyer knows, you sure you want to piss off the judge over this? We all know it. Every lawyer in town, every one of them says, you do not annoy somebody who has the power to make decisions on your case. Because some of them won't let it get to them because they're adults and take the job seriously. And others of them are like, you talking to me? You talking to me? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I'll do to you and your client? And you always have to, judges are human. And some of them are really good, and some of them are petty and nasty and vindictive. And I've seen both, right? And I'm not making any conclusions about the court in this case when I make that comment. But I'm saying we did not gratuitously raise these issues. They're very important. And I talked to people who were trained psychologists who know their craft before we ever offered. We made sure we knew what we were talking about. I think we had a declaration from Dr. Sarah Vincent that was pages and pages and pages long, justifying the academic and support for the position that we took. So we were responsible. And again, we don't control what the court does, but we do control what we do. And we're not going to stand by and watch justice drive on by and act like we didn't see it.
Let me throw three.
Unfortunately, I got about 3 more minutes. I'm sorry.
Just in that time.
No, I got 7 more minutes because it's
I've got 3 or 4 questions for you to take on in that period of time. One, the Floyd bill.
Yes.
Didn't pass. What happened?
Well, it didn't pass yet. It still can. Right now, it made it through the House. It's pending in the Senate. Senator Cory Booker is working as hard as he can. Congresswoman Karen Bass is working as hard as she can. And Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, is negotiating on the other side. And I hope he's working as hard as he can. And then now they've called in Jim Clyburn from South Carolina, who's trying to say, okay, let's patch this back together. And I want to tell you that I think every provision in that bill is very important, including qualified immunity, changing that doctrine. It's not a good doctrine. It's judge made. It's not statutory. It's not, no group of legislators did that. That's just something a judge did, in my view, to sort of like protect officers from liability. But they're working hard to get the bill passed. I will say this. Let me just remind everybody of this. There were good people who were ardent civil rights advocates in 1963 and 4 who were pissed off because the 1964 Act did not have voting in it and did not have housing in it. But we got voting in 65 and we got housing in 68, and we're trying to fight for all 3 of them to this very second. My thing is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's not say if we can't get everything, we don't want anything. Let's get what we can now, as much as we can, and then come back next year fighting to get the rest. So that's that.
That's a story in the state of Minnesota. We just ended a legislative session. Some things happened, some things did not. What's the scorecard in Minnesota for our people and for human rights and police reform?
Well, let me first of all just say that you all may not know this young man, but his name is Cedric Frazier. He is an amazing young legislator, first year, freshman, and he fought to get some great police reform through and a lot of good things. If you look at,
he's out of Plymouth, right? Out of Plymouth.
Yeah, he's out of Plymouth. He's out of Plymouth, and he led the fight. Though he's just a freshman legislator, did remarkably well, and we got a number of good reform efforts through, including like stopping no-knock warrants, stopping chokeholds. There's a lot more to do. I don't want to tell everybody that we're there yet, but police accountability is a long-term struggle. We've got to do it. There are a number of folks who brought together some critical reforms. Some were dropped out, but the bill did pass through with some good things in it, and that reflect the priorities of people who are really just trying to bring about a more perfect union. There were some things that got dropped out requiring body cam video for everybody across the country. Their body cam video should be released to families right away. That did not occur, but there were some things that passed that limit law enforcement from stopping you for certain minor offenses in an effort to stop pretextual stops. And they're not going to end police brutality, but I hope they will curtail it. And then Tim Walz issued some executive orders regarding the police officer standards and training board data, requiring it to create a public database so that officers who get infractions and things like that can't just go to another department. And so just kind of, department hop based on having really bad records. And, then the governor also, issued an executive order saying that video had to be released to families within 5 days. And, and so there's a number of other things, but I would say keep up the fight. If people want more and they should demand more, the answer is not to say the system doesn't work. The answer is to stay in there, keep on pushing,
make it work,
and don't quit.
Make it work for you.
That's right.
Two final things. Gas prices are scoring. You've pushed back against that. And secondly, you've also joined a lawsuit against the giant tech companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon. Just briefly, what should we know about those?
Well, here's the first thing, about the antitrust lawsuits that we are doing multi-district litigation with other states on. Yes, Facebook, Google, and Amazon provide some services that people found helpful. But did you know we pay the most for internet service providers in the world, far higher than in Europe, all because of monopoly? And let me just tell you, if you're a small business person, you are paying more to put your stuff on, to list your stuff on Amazon. I mean, and Amazon could put you on a back page. It could put you where they want you. Mm-hmm. You're selling Zoe or Zoe's pickles. You can put her on page 29. Nobody ever see them pickles. Mm-hmm. Or if they they might just copy your pickles and then put their pickles on page 1. Put yours on page 29. They should not be able to do that. Way back 100 years ago, we had a very similar situation where you had railroad companies that would just say, you know what, JP Morgan and the gang, we own some railroads. We're going to put the grain from our fields in the first car, and we're going to charge ourselves nothing, and we're going to charge all the other grain growers big dollars, as much as we can squeeze out of them. And we passed a law that said you could not do price discrimination like that. We need to do the same thing with Amazon. And there's a number of other things, we need to do to just get them under control. And I think we should limit their size, and we should get more businesses doing this stuff. And we should have diversity requirements as the FCC is going to, allow more providers into the market. They ought to make sure that a certain percentage of them are people of color and women-owned businesses. We need to make sure that we don't have a monopolized country, and even in the area of cannabis, now, if we just say, let people can buy recreational cannabis, the only thing that's going to happen is RJ Reynolds and Altria and all the big cigarette companies are just going to be the big marijuana companies. Mm-hmm. We've got to pay attention to monopoly, and the monopoly is black folks' business. I mean, I would like to get somebody on who knows a lot about the black hair care industry, because what they would tell you is it used to be, because of our hair texture, that it was basically black companies that controlled, all of the hair care products.
Not anymore.
Not no more. Revlon said, "Oh, there's 35 million of y'all. We can sell y'all pomade, and if you don't sell your company to us, we will copy your product, fight you in court over intellectual property, sell your product for 20 cents cheaper than the cheapest offering you can make. You will not be able to produce your product because we got economies of scale, and you're out of business, and you're going to sell out to us anyway." And so we've got to think much, much more. I can tell you this. I believe that market concentration is the single biggest threat to the American economy for everybody, especially and including people of color. Because if there's only one big company, what do you think happens to wages? You want to work in this industry, you're going to pay what I give you.
That's right.
Wages have been stuck because the big companies say, we ain't paying you nothing but this. Why do you think the federal minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 for over 12 years? You can't get an apartment nowhere in the country for $15,000 a year. If you pay $1,500 a month in rent for a 1 or 2 bedroom times 12, well, guess what? You're over. The income, your total income will not justify the rent you have to pay.
Right.
So antitrust, y'all, get your mind around it. Big companies are not good for the economy. They're not good for wages. They're not good for small business. They're not good for nobody. And I'm not anti-Amazon. I might order something over Amazon. I'm just saying, break them up, make them smaller, get some competition. You think more people don't want to enter the business that Amazon is in? Of course they do.
They do.
Barriers to entry just too high to make more people more money. That's one thing. Now, I mentioned gas prices. Some of y'all, now I think, Dr. B, aren't you from Texas originally? So a few months when it was really cold, in Texas, they had snow in Texas back in the wintertime. Y'all remember that? I bet Dr. B, growing up, you see snow in Texas. You're like, boy, it's raining grits, mama. What's going on up there? And, I remember my mom was from Louisiana. She said, first time I snow, I didn't know what it was, but it was, it got cold in Texas and it snowed. And the gas prices shot through the roof. People who normally pay something like $300 or $150 a month for gas, now paying $8,000 a month for gas. It was outrageous, and there's a lot of reasons why. Anyway, a lot of people don't know, and I'm glad to be able to tell you all now, that it is the Minnesota Attorney General's office that stands between the utility companies and your bill. So we are the ones who fight for the ratepayer. That's our job. And we're always on the ratepayer side. We're always on your side. So, XL, and, the other big companies came together and said, oh, we need to add on, 350 million, 800 million onto the bill of ratepayers. And we'll individualize it, and then we'll stretch it out over 18 months, but get ready for a bill that's going to be around $25 higher, maybe more than that. And we said, oh, hell no. No, we submitted comments to the Public Utilities Commission arguing. And what we said is, look, you're paying, so here's the way gas is paid for. There is a market for gas day by day. And then if you need to buy gas to sell to your customers, you have what they call the spot market, which is and if it's high today, good. And if it's low today, if it's high today, bad for the customer. If it's low today, that's bad. But you can also buy it a week out, 2 weeks out, a month out, and lock in the price. You saw what was happening in the weather. You knew that prices were clearly going to go up because demand was going to skyrocket, and you didn't do anything to mitigate those prices at all. You need to eat that yourself. And so we submitted comments to make sure that your heating bill is more in the range that you can afford it. And so that's what I just think people should know, because, you know, the public, a lot of folks, you talk to folks, what's the Public Utilities Commission? They don't know. Smart people don't know. I mean, they're raising their kids. They're going to work every day. Why would they?
Yeah.
But it is the Attorney General's office to make sure that that utility bill that you get in the mail is as small as we can possibly get it. And we're fighting daily to help you do that. So that's all a part of trying to help people afford their lives. And I just want you to know that we are in a battle with these utilities to keep your bill low, because in my opinion, these companies did not do their due diligence to keep your bill as small as they could. And they just kind of relaxed and didn't do what they needed to do. And if you get a bill that is too high for you to pay, you need to call them up, and you need to call the AG's office up, and we will fight to help you. Now, I just want to tell everybody, 651-296-3353. You can call us if your bill looks crazy, and we'll try to help you. And our last thing I want to say, and I'm actually 6 minutes late for my next thing, is a lot of people, when I left Congress and ran for AG, they were like, "Are you out of your mind? Why are you leaving? You crazy?" Well, let me just tell y'all, if I stayed in Congress, I couldn't have got involved in the Chauvin matter. I couldn't have got involved in the criminal justice reform. I wouldn't have been able to set up a wage theft unit to protect people's money from getting stolen from unscrupulous employers. I wouldn't be able to fight to keep your bill down like that. I wouldn't have been able to do these things. And so as Attorney General, I feel that I can do more good for a community than I could in Congress. And basically, Ilhan Omar has voted the same way I would have voted anyway. And so I'm cool with making space for a young African-American woman, first Somali, to be able to have a shot. And I don't love these titles. You know, y'all don't hear me say, "Call me Congressman Ellison" or General Ellison. You ain't never heard me say that, because I don't love titles and I don't believe in titles. I mean, not the people who earned them shouldn't get them. But for me, I'm just Brother Keith trying to fight. I'm not really an Attorney General, nor was I ever a congressman. I'm a civil rights worker who happens to occupy those jobs now. And so that's me. And I'm wishing y'all a wonderful afternoon. Love you.
Keith, what a wonderful conversation, man. Always good to see you and to hear you, and keep it up, brother. Keep it up.
Peace.
We're going to keep going here. Thanks, Dr. B. Wow, what a great program, a great conversation. Yelly, Zoe, and Brenda, this was a rare treat, but that's what we do here, you know, and I think we are bringing the issues front and center. So I want to focus back on this. And Yelly, before I go back to Dr. B and to Zoe, maybe as a journalist, former journalist, and as an entrepreneur, I'll ask you to weigh in on the issue we began talking about, and that's that question of our community being marginalized in general by systems and processes reflected in the language of Judge Cahill. And how do you see, as a community, we need to be able to respond, first by getting the information, but also voicing our opinions as well?
Thank you, Mr. McFarlane. And that's a mouthful. You know, Keith Ellison's, what do you call it? Minnesota should truly be glad that we have him as the Attorney General. Not just glad. We should thank God for having him as an Attorney General, as our Attorney General. We've had several Attorney Generals in the state. We moved to Minnesota in 1998. And I'm not saying this just because he's African American. I haven't seen any Attorney General do as much as he has done within the past few years that he's been in that position for the community in Minnesota. I didn't even know anything about the utility. But what he said about the utility companies, frankly speaking, is shocking. But then if you know the utility companies, they are in business to make as much money from their customers as they can. And they don't care, excuse my language, who get whacked. I was going to say something else. But they don't care who get whacked and who they could care less whether you have money or not. Now, let's talk about shoving. I think the judge, one of these days in his lifetime, it could be tomorrow, it could be next week, he's going to realize he made a big mistake because history is not on his side. And history is going to judge him by that tiny little things he wrote in his memo. Even after the AG's office contested it, instead of saying, you know what, I made a mistake, I should have taken it into consideration, he went ahead and said, no, I'm not going to change this. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. That's arrogance. But then you see, they've been doing it to our community anyway, and nobody's challenged them or taking them to task for doing it. But this time, he made a big mistake, and he's going to pay for it because not only is he going to get challenged, people are going to educate him on how to treat Black children. What else does he need? I mean, these kids were crying on the stand. They made these kids come to this stand. They were crying. They were telling him everything he needed to know. Not just him. Any stupid person on earth should know that these kids are traumatized. Those kids said everything. But he chose, now please mark my language, he chose not to recognize those things because he could get away with it. Because they've done it like that. The system is always against us. And he is just a manifestation of the terrible system that we have in place that basically brutalizes the Black community all the time, and they get away with it all the time. How on earth can any commonsensical person say that the children weren't traumatized? I don't think he even knows anything about psychology 101 anyway. So if he does, he will have known that children have a different way of reacting to trauma. If he doesn't know, then he should have asked to be educated. He should have asked, like this kid said, he should have asked somebody. But he didn't. In his level of arrogance and his state of arrogance and the level of ignorance, he exposed himself as somebody who didn't care or who doesn't want to learn. But because the system has always been like that, and he thought he could just get away with it. I would stop for now.
Well,
I'll pass this to Mr. McFarlane.
Yeah, what it reminds me of, Yali, and I think I said this last week, is that too often there's a general inability to recognize that we are human and that we have suffering and that we have feelings, or that our feelings are of consequence. There's a almost clinical disconnection to our humanity. They treat us as though we're in their laboratory, and we are subjects of their curiosity, but not connected to their humanity. That's kind of what my feeling is. I had something else to say, but I can't think of what it was. But let me pass the talking stick over to Zoe. Zoe, thank you for your work and your leadership and your assessment of the issues we're talking about today.
Yeah, as far as I'll weigh in mainly on Derek Chauvin and the sentencing and how not taking into account the children. The children, of course, they're going to absolutely react differently. This is most likely their first trauma. They don't understand, their brains are processing and overloaded. They're scared, they're freezing. They didn't run because it was a shock factor, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is really happening. And it's a real feeling, I'm sure. And being so overly wrought with emotion and so confused by a cop that is hurting somebody when we're supposed to think cops are supposed to help us and support us, and being clearly shown that that was not happening in that moment, and feeding more into the already general belief that cops are not safe, and everybody tells us that they should be safe, but also there's an undercurrent that our culture says they are not safe, and clearly seeing that. So these babies are traumatized and are extremely traumatized, even more so now that they've had to go through the court experience and tell their story, and then have the judge not take it into account, is just another trauma, which has now layered that trauma, which has made it even more detrimental to their life, more than likely. And so I'm hoping those children are getting help, and that they can find their way out of that trauma, because this will definitely affect them and their families and generations to come, sadly. That's my input.
Dr. B, let me ask you to take it from there. And as we're looking at the kind of the revealing of both the disconnection, regarding the experience of these children, and putting that in the context of disparities that we experience across the board, and then putting that in context of what's happening with COVID-19. And I'm wondering, how do you see a tie or a connection if the institutions that serve us disregard our humanity? That's one scenario. Then I'm going to pivot just a little bit to talk about the threat being posed to everybody in society around COVID-19. And within that, the general excellent response in Minnesota to getting the adult population both aware, first of all, tested, aware, and then vaccinated, but there still are pockets. And I'm wondering if there is a correlation between this resistance or lack or hesitation in the Black community to vaccination, particularly among the young, right? And some of the mid-level people as well. Can you connect that to this sense of disenfranchisement that I say is represented by Judge Cahill's voice and action? Maybe I'm stretching it here, but Dr. B, what do you think? I'm trying to say that in my mind, here's a place where the institution, the court itself, is saying that, you're really not hurt by this. You're not traumatized by it. So we do justice, we do a good job, and your little thing is not important to us. So you put that on one shelf and go to the next shelf and say, oh, we're doing a good job in Minnesota in health in general. And yeah, some parts of the population are not being reached or are not being responded to. But at the end of the day, at the back of our mind, is that kind of what we expected? And are we willing to accept that? We had a headline, I think, in Monday's paper saying that, let me look for it. Interesting. It was a statement by a politician, a story I think that Brenda wrote. And the claim or the charge was that Minnesotans must be okay with Minnesota being the worst place in the nation for African Americans. So does that show up somewhere? I mean, all the bragging we do about how great Minnesota is, but it's at the same time, we've been talking about the disparities, and they're not new, they've been here for a long time. So does it mean that at some level, the power is okay with it being the way it is? And what is that telling us? So long question. Dr. B,
it's a long question. I'll take the stick. Thank you, brother. Woo! I'm telling you, deep, because I think the thread, the golden thread that goes from the first sentence you made in this long question to now, that thread is still around humanity. Mm-hmm. And does our Black body matter? Does our Black future, which is in our babies, does it matter? Does our existence matter? And so one of the things with the oppressors is that the only way they could cognitively manage it is to go through that process I've talked to you about before, mental side. Mm-hmm. So, and that psychological killing off of our humanity means that those who are killing it have to lose some of their own humanity to dehumanize us. And in this process that we're just talking about, whether it be a system that's a school district, where they have 9-year-old kids getting in the back of paddy wagons of police because they had a fight on the playground, or whether it is coming to the court to contest a ticket, and the whole room is packed with black folks who look like you, and you wonder, we're in Minnesota. I think I was in the Chocolate City, but what I see up in here, to all the way to these subtleties that we're experiencing in the way judges like Cahill write their reports or write their guidelines and statements. And what hit me in that particular piece is when we think about COVID, just think about it for a minute. Brother Floyd had COVID. He couldn't breathe. He was having trouble breathing before they even, dealt with him. But he wasn't going to die because he had healed relatively well from the COVID. But the symbol of it means that there's a predatory nature around us for our vulnerabilities. It's not just a disease factor. It's a human man-made hatred that preys upon us. And that hatred for us is the only way that the oppressors would be able to do it and still stand. It's no way that you can kill a whole bunch of people just because their skin is dark and their hair is kinky. You kill a whole bunch of them without something happening to your own spirit. So, brother, what I see with this and how I tie it to COVID is that the problem with abusers is that if you get abused enough, you start believing it's true, that you don't deserve any better, that you don't have a right to your body. Well, when we were in chattel slavery, we didn't have a right to our bodies. And some of us don't claim that right now, presently. We don't claim that right to secure, to care for, to heal in our bodies. So that's the most tragic component, is that message is being taught to our babies. That little 9-year-old girl, she learned that day that her body didn't matter. And if a grown man, a big grown man, can be put under a knee and murdered in front of you, what can I do? I'm just a child. I know right from wrong, and I know that's wrong. What can I do? He called for his mama. That's what I would do. I'm a 9-year-old child. And there's still no help. So the helplessness that it creates, the harm it creates, it saturates us to our soul. And it creates soul wounds that take a lifetime and multiple generations to heal. And with that, I give you the stick back, brother.
Well, thank you. This is always a wonderful conversation. Brenda, if you want to jump in here, you're welcome to. Just talking as we are and hearing what we've heard from Attorney General Keith Ellison and sharing as we are sharing, I think is a wonderful thing. For me, Dr. B and friends, it's about how do we organize a call to action in our people and in and of ourselves. So what do we do? How do we make these conversations lead to action? And we encourage ourselves to demonstrate and others to activate and be change makers in community. And Attorney General Brother Keith said, phone calls, emails, write letters, show up at the court. It's a public space. Show up at the legislature. And somehow I think we have to sort of create the normalcy of doing that for us. And it's easier said than done.
Yes.
As I'm speaking, Yeli, I'm remembering when I first moved to Twin Cities, I lived in St. Paul and had to go somewhere in North Minneapolis, which is where I am near now. But I was on Plymouth Avenue and I was trying to find an address and drove to the end of Plymouth Avenue where Worth Park begins.
Yes.
And what I saw was this big chalet, right? So Brenda, this was like driving on somewhere like on Main Street or somewhere in Kansas City, and then driving into Overland Park. And when you go past a certain place, you know you don't belong there. The history, right? The history of our experience tells you somehow inside. When I hit Worth Park, you know, even though it was a public park and a public chalet, that didn't register with me. What registered with me was white people and a lot of money playing golf. And
Yes.
am I going to get in trouble for being somewhere I'm not supposed to be? That's the nature of conditioning in our society. And that's the nature of conditioning that shows up in the remarks of Judge Cahill when he presumes that it didn't matter, you know, that these kids are not traumatized, and it shows up in other elements of community as well. So how do we act on that? How do we, number one, recognize how damaged we are, you know, by the environment that we are in? We know what the history is, and it's historical. How do we get beyond that? So I'm going to just throw that out as a conversation piece for anybody. Brenda, we're down short on time, but yeah, as a writer, what are your thoughts?
I thought about Yelly last week when he talked about white arrogance. And I think I wrote about that. And I think that's what we saw in Cahill, you know, that he just assumed. But I also remember what the phenomenal Ted Thompson said last week, that young people are tired of being diminished, denied, and disconnected, not only from the education system, but from their own homes. So it's a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of effort, but we have to do it to save them. They're so far behind now, and we really have to work to do it. I'm going to start tutoring on Saturdays. They need help in literacy and math. So I just think the Attorney General is phenomenal. He is so real and so person connected. You have to be very proud. I'm like Yelly, you've got to be very proud of him, not just from the case, but he's tough, and he is really impressive, and it just comes from his heart. It just spills over like a Dr. Bravada Garrett Akinsanya. Love her, that heart. We're going to do it.
All right, there we go. Dr. B, final word for you. We're going to close out here in 90 seconds. Final thoughts, instructions.
Yeah. Today we talked about COVID. We talked about social wellness. We talked about social justice. And I just want everybody to know we're entitled to be well. We deserve to be well. The price has been paid and continues to be paid for us to be well. And we will be well by any means necessary.
Wow.
That's it.
With that, thank you all. We'll see you next time. I'm Al
Thank
McFarlane.
you.
This is Conversations with Al McFarlane, the Healing Circle. Take care.
All right.